it in a container and just turn it up and just hold it against. And I heard one man told about somebody that had got bitten by, is it a copperhead or rattlesnake one? And he said that they just hold it to it, and he said he could just see the poison coming out of the bite, coming out into the jar that had, or the container that had the turpentine in it. But that was Neil Cantrell that was telling that.
Would people in Greenbrier get bit often?
I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't hear tell of it much. When you get bit.
Tell us about what it was like in there. You had the hotel was pretty bustling. You had a store. How many people were living in there? Big schools?
Well, I'll tell you, we had the school that was tore down, then they built a big new one where the hotel was. They built a new school. Big
There's
foreign
about
school.
250 students
Yeah, I've got the
come to the new building.
So there must have been
There's the new one.
200 or 300 families in there.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, I'm
There's all up them rivers.
I believe Esther Longby did some research once and said there's around 650 people living there at the time that the school, he and Evelina, by the way, Evelina was a nice, you remember Evelina?
Oh, yeah, she's my age. About my age. I've sat with her at school.
She's the only lady from Greenbrier that ever become a seminarian, the little dwarf lady. But did you know she finished the seminary school?
But Marshall Whaley was just like her, but he never did finish school like that, no.
Let's go back to the midwife business. If my wife was going to have a baby, how would we take care of her? Were there any doctors in Greenbrier?
Well, now, I had Dr. Yarborough with two of my babies, but just the midwife for the rest of them.
Was it any easier?
Oh, Lord, yes. Lawrence Wade, I had him with Lawrence. You all know him. He weighed 12 pounds. You had to take the fauces and take him. That's something else. Then he delivered Jim, our youngest boy. But Mama delivered my daughter Mary with the First National Bank. She didn't have time after the doctor.
Oliver, can you describe how you went to the midwife?
I most certainly can, yeah. Yeah, I remember that awfully well. Speaking of Dr. Hoffman now, it is in the night. Boy, it was dark as dungeon. So I got a lantern and I head out to Dr. Hoffman's. I was going to get him. Of course, he was the first choice, you know. He lived about 3/4 of a mile away. He wasn't at home. He was gone someplace out on a call. So I come back and I hit up, I knew where there was a midwife lived up on Indian Creek. So I hit up there to Ephraim McCarter. No, it is Nathan Spradlin's wife.
Polly's her name.
Polly Spradlin.
Ain't Polly, she's my
And she was getting old, she wasn't able to go. Well, I knew another on up, about 1/4 of a mile further up the creek. I hit up there, and so she is slow when she got up. Of course, at midnight or a little after a while, naturally anyone would be a little bit slow and they'd crawl out of bed. And so Ephraim, her husband, he could use some pretty rough curse word. So he come over and he said, come over a curse word, and he said, Judy, says you better hurry up, says they're needing you down there. So she hurried up a little and we started down the road then and got down, and there was had to cross a slough to get into the main footlog that crossed the river. Well, it had rained, the river was up quite a bit. That slough was up, it was about that deep. And so when we got to the edge of the water, she says, Law, that's what we want to do. I said, here, just get on my back. And I said, I'll show you what we'll do. And so she got on my back, and here we went through the stream. And
She still had the lantern.
yeah, still had the lantern. I had to hold it up, to keep it out of the water. But well, I thought a lot of times that I'd sure like to have a picture of that. But, well, she done the work when it got there.
Wet and all.
She wasn't wet. I was the one that was wet. Of course, I wasn't taking any part in it.
Did you have to wait outside the cabin?
No, I went inside. Yeah, I was in there. So it wasn't but a little bit till the baby was born. It's premature. It lived about a day and night. It is born 7 months. Of course, it would have lived if it had been to hospital where they could put it in an incubator. Something I'm satisfied with.
You used Julie though for successive births of your children, didn't you?
Did what?
You used Julie again, did you not, for a midwife?
No, never did use her. I never used Dr. Hoffman later.
But a midwife was pretty well respected, though.
Oh, yes. My Aunt Polly Whaley, she took, her pictures in one of them books with Doc Hoffman and some more ladies. Well, I used Doc Engel once. We called him Severevelt. He come and delivered Jim. Delivered the Price place. He said, I don't know the way up there. And Anna told him that he'd wait and show him. That's Bananas' Ranger. He's the first Ranger we ever had in a zombie. Was. And I bought the picture of him and my daddy. They rode horses. Dad went all through the mountains and showed Dennis. Do you remember them 2 horses on?
Did you all
Yes.
shy away from Copeland area? Was Copeland your neighbor?
Well, there's some good people on Copeland. They used to come over to church, and there's some that wasn't so good. Had some bad habits.
What were the bad habits on folks on Copeland Creek?
Well, they made one thing that they specialized in, moonshining. Made moonshine whiskey, and they enjoyed, some of them, they enjoyed drinking some of it too. And they would fuss and they'd fight and they'd just do a little bit of just everything, more that could be thought about.
Could you ever hear shooting coming out of there?
No, you couldn't hear the gun from Greenbrier, could you?
No, you couldn't.
Too far off.
Heard of it though, happening.
Yeah.
What was the opinion of Greenbrier people dating Copeland people?
Well, I'll tell you, Glenn, Maudie Plamons dated a Siegel boy, Arthur Siegel. They was a good family. He used to be the law. He come over to Greenbrier a lot. You remember him, Mom?
Yeah, I do.
And that's a good family that lived on Little Copeland. They didn't live on Big Copeland, on Little Copeland.
Was there a difference from the people? If you lived on Big Copeland, were you a little better quality of people than Little Copeland? Or?
It was just about the same, wasn't it, all?
Pretty much the same.
Pretty much
yeah.
the same. Just a lesser place.
But you were not afraid to go through Copeland. You said that when at one time both of you remember the Pittman fairs that used to be held here in the 20s, and you
Yeah.
can't. Would you mind telling how you would go back to Greenbrier?
Well,
from
we
here?
walked from Greenbrier down here to the fair, and one of my cousins told me, Sam Brown's daughter used to run a store right over here, and she said, if you go up Little Copeland, it won't be as far as go back the main road. So we went that way, and down and over what they call Partontown in Greenbrier. Of course, Partontown was called Greenbrier and all.
Did you have any trouble?
No, I could go anywhere near in them mountains. I used to go camping with my daddy.
Was there, when you all were little, particularly those people, were there many Indians on this side of the mountain?
Well, there wasn't none, was there?
I don't remember any.
No. I went over the woods.
If you were courting back then, what was the manners in which I wanted to go out with a gal that might be my wife? When I could only see her at church hardly. What did you
I
do?
left school.
Well, most of the people at church was about the only place that they did see each other, and they'd walk, young man would walk his girlfriend home, providing that she said yes, or she could say no very easy to him. I remember one down the church that I went to up in Greenbrier. It had two doors. One door that opened to the front, one door was for the men, and the other doors for the women. The women sat on one side, and the men sat on the other side. And say there was a young lady there that a young man now, he wanted to ask for a date, wanted to walk her home.
That was the extent of a date, huh?
So he'd get back at the door, the women's door, where they came out. He'd stand back there till she'd come by, and he'd ask her about seeing her home or walking her home or whatever. And I remember one young man, he's standing back there by the door, and he was waiting for a young lady to come by, and he was going to ask her about taking her home. So it was in the wintertime, and it was muddy, you know. And she'd wore a pair of overshoes to the church. And he stood there by the door quite a little while, and he finally got out of her patience give away. So he come walking on out. He said Gladys was the girl's name. He says, I was going to ask Gladys for a date. Says, and it took her so damn long to get her overshoes off.
Was that Andrew Gladys? Hell.
Then was Oliver Whaley was the boy.
Did they marry?
No, they never did. They never did date. That was the end of it.
Hell.
All right, he did get to walk her home. Sometimes she lived 3-4 miles, wouldn't she, or the girl?
Oh yeah, they would.
A lot of them lived 2 miles away from church, didn't they?
Yeah.
Was it common to kiss a girl before you married her?
Oh no, I never did. When I was courting the one that I finally married, I never did kiss her before we was married.
Except you didn't call it kissing. I think you called it smooching in those days.
Yeah, they didn't call it kissing back then. I remember one time that I walked her home, and her daddy, he was pretty choosy about who his daughters dated. And 2 of his older daughters had already married 2 Huskies. One of them was my brother, and another Husky, and he didn't care too much about either one of them, I don't think. And he really didn't want another Husky in the family, so we walked up in front of the house at the road, and the house set back a little ways from the road. Oh, I could see him. He was walking up and down the front porch looking out there, and he's a big fella too, and boy, I didn't dare walk in there either. So I just said a few words, and I turned back.
He's about the biggest man up there, wasn't he, Uncle Louis?
Yeah. And
Did the boys ever get asked inside the house?
Oh, yes.
Did they have dinner with you? Did they ever spend?
Well, sometimes they did. My
How
husband ate them in any time before we was married.
did he ever spend the night in the same cabin?
Oh, no, they didn't stay all night.
I just have read some things that if it was a ways to walk home, You know, the daddy might even ask him to stay the night and put him over there by the fire and keep an eye on him, and then he'd go home the next day or something.
Or if they'd have got sick or anything, they would. There's good people in Greenbrier. They wouldn't turn nobody away, would they? All?
No, they wouldn't. Of course, people
No.
back then, they was used to doing a lot of walking. They didn't pay any attention to a young man to walk 5 or 6 miles after he'd take his girlfriend home at night.
Yeah.
Oh, did you ever kiss a boy before you got married?
No.
Well, forgive me for asking. Did people, if you did, were you considered a loose person, or did anybody?
Oh, yeah, if they'd have been caught, some young man had been caught a kissing some girl, they'd have thought that was something terrible then. Yeah, they'd have just thought that, well, just considered him not a nice person, in other words. If they'd have been caught a hugging and a kissing, things like that, which people doesn't pay much attention to now.
What about holding hands or putting an arm around somebody? Was that acceptable?
Not too much, no. No.
Not in Greenbrier.
No, I remember
That is a
one
strict
young man.
place.
I remember one young man, he was courting a girl, and they was walking along together, and he put his arm around her, and boy, she had him to take her down to her. He said, somebody's liable to see us. So they didn't want to be seen doing things like that.
Did it happen behind the barn, though?
No, not
No,
too
not
much.
like that.
No.
Well, they might have been a few people, but if the times is like it now, like it was in Greenbrier, it'd be a lot better place to live.
Why?
Because people are all good to one another near there. Hardly ever had any trouble. Did they all?
No, they didn't.
Most all of them went to church and everything.
What was life, how did life evolve around the church?
Well, you mean that, well, the people all turned out up there at the churches and all. They was 40 baptized one time up there.
At
My
one
brother,
time.
one time, took 3 preachers, Russell Bohannon, Uncle Walter Oldby, and Russell Bohannon. My brother's one of them, Harold Whaley, and Loney was one of them. I was working at Johnson City and been home on vacation when the meeting was going on, but I had to go back before the baptizing. And
Floating foot logs. Oliver, did you run a lot of logs down the creeks? Did you float foot logs, or?
This one, I think, is the one, the floating foot log. I
Oh,
believe that was
yeah.
a mode of transportation rather than have raised foot logs. This one,
Yeah, they called it a float log. It's down on the surface of the water. And the way they do that now, when the stream would get up, you know, come a hard rain and the stream would swell, it'd wash it around. They had one end of it chained, and the other end would wash around. Well, when the water got back down, they'd take the chain loose that end, and they'd go to the lower end of the log, and they'd push it up the stream till that end then come up to where the chain was. Well, they'd put the chain around that end of the log, and they'd take had a pole, and they'd start pushing it around the end. They'd just up the river, they'd start pushing it around. They'd go around to the other side of the stream. Well, they'd go over there then, and they'd get it leveled up. I've crossed it a many a time there. When I was working in the CC camp back in the 30s, I'd go around there before daylight in the morning. I had a flashlight, and the water'd be sloshing over the log, at the middle of the log, and it'd be cold as whiz, and it'd be just froze a sheet of ice there. But I found out how to do to keep it from being slick. I'd get a pocket full of sand, this sandbar on that side, and I'd walk out there, and it'd slosh over, and when it sloshed over, why, I pitched the sand, a handful of sand on the ice, and I got across before it sloshed over again. I've crossed that way a many a time.
Was that the only floating foot log in Greenbrier?
Well, that was what really wasn't in Greenbrier, just down close to. It's Cove, they call it.
Did you teach school?
I taught school 1 year, one school, and that 1 month for a teacher that taught the next. She was wanting to finish up her school, her high school or whatever. And I taught 1 month for her.
Where?
That is up on what they called Indian Creek.
How many children did you have?
Oh, I had about 55 or 60.
How many teachers?
Just one. Just one teacher.
You had them all in there, and how'd you keep them straight and where they were and what they were supposed to study?
Well, that is quite a little job sometimes. Well, one time I know this one boy, one young man, he'd been around to ask something or another, I don't remember what. And as he went back, another one had started up. And they got in a fight.
While you're waiting on that, here's a picture of the church, one of them, part of it, and it's over the store.
That is the church with overlooking the store, and this is the center of the community. Have you seen that picture of him? Let me show it to you again. As you look across from there, you're up on the hill looking at this school,
Oh, that's pretty good.
and that's the top of the store. See, Greenbrier Store. Looking on up toward Ramsey Cascades.
Wow.
1918. There's a raised foot log, and this is a swinging foot log.
All clear, isn't it?
Yeah.
What the heck were we talking about?
Indian school.
Oh, yeah. You had 58 children in a one-room
I
schoolhouse?
had 50 or 60. There might have been 60. I don't remember for sure. That is 1926.
And they had, and these two boys, one guy finished asking a question. Do you want to pick that up for us?
Yeah, he'd started back, and this other one was coming up. Of course, there wasn't supposed to be two on the floor, you know, at the same time. They're supposed to get permission to come around to ask something of them. And one of them, he sort of punched the other one with his elbows on as they passed by, and boy, they locked horns. I'm telling you. Back then, the teacher was allowed to whip them, and they had what it took to whip them with it. Now they'd have good long switches, about that long. Boy, they'd lay it on to them too. I'm telling you, they would.
Did you?
Yeah, I called both of them around there and gave them a good whipping. They went back to their seat in a good humor with each other. Yeah, they didn't stay mad at each other. I remember one time I had a hole in the overhead ceiling there and had a ladder to go up in there. One young man, he come early one morning for time for school to take up, and he climbed up in there. And when the teacher, when he started then with his classes, this young man that was up in there, he went to preaching like I said, like little Hard Morgan. He was, well, he'd go about and bottom chairs, split wood. He'd hunt woods over for split wood and make splits and bottom chairs. Well, while he was doing the work, why, he preached to people. And so he got up in there, this young man did, and he was preaching like a little heart, and he just coming down on the side on us. And so the teacher, he stopped. He didn't know what on earth to think. He didn't know for a little while where all that noise was coming from. So they had to get the ladder and get him back down. But But he didn't get a whipping for that. He was lucky. But it was really something
Was
fun.
this when you was going to school yourself as a student?
Yeah, that is back when I just first started to school. It was Lee Coggle that got up in the attic part. Boy, he was coming. He had that sermon that Hardin Morgan preached. He had her down pat, and boy, he was coming down.
Could you give us a rendition of what it might sound like?
I guess it could if I'd try right hard. He preached hard, and he preached about his son Johnny. He didn't preach any Bible much at all. Hardly ever get on the Bible, but he'd preach about his son Johnny. He said, one day I sent my son Johnny to hunt the cows, and he didn't come back at the right time. I went way back on yon big mountain to see what my son Johnny was a-doing. And I looked way over in yon big holler and saw my son Johnny standing by a big log. He reached way back up in that big log and he pulled out a horse's head. And he reached way back up in that big log and pulled out a horse's tail. He went to beating that old nigger over the head of that horse's tail, saying, yee-haw, yee-haw, yee-haw. That was
That sounds like that might have been Oliver up in the attic of the school preaching.
Now that's the way he'd preach, but boy, he could come down on me.
I heard him preach in the church most over, that Morgan man.
Speaking of preachers, though, Birgie, tell us about some of your preachers, how far they came to preach in your church.
From Cage Cove. Preacher Birgie come from Cage Cove. He'd come down Caney, stay the first night on Caney Creek. You know where Caney is. And then he'd come on to Greenbar. At 2 o'clock, they had church on Saturday and Sunday too. And one time, Uncle Jack Wheely, he went to his house for his lunch on Saturday, he'd come on. And his overshoes was froze to the stirrup. And Uncle Jack had to help him loose them. Now, Macy told me that all before they moved to Cleveland. He told me. He's in our church for years. He's a good old man.
How long would it take to get from Cage Cove to Greenbrier?
Well, he rode just about all day to come down to Caney Creek. And then he'd leave there and come on in plenty of time to preach. It was on Saturday when he'd start. I mean, he'd start a Friday and come to Caney, then come on and be there at 2 o'clock, preach on Saturday, and then preached on Sunday. It took him a day and a half to go back. How many preachers do that?
Would they pass the hat for him?
No, we never made up money in our church. But the people helped him, they just walk around and give him money. Always made up for sick people or something like that, but not for the pastor.
Just give him a chicken or something?
No, we didn't do that. They'll just give him money. Oh. Back then, they didn't do that in all the churches,
One reason you didn't have money to give, I guess, a lot of times, that's why we showed favors in form of labor, of love, when they needed it.
Oh, yes. I remember my great-granny, Jane Whaley. I don't remember her. She was a widow for years. Grandpa Preston died and left her. But she tended an old-fashioned corn mill, and she'd sell a little corn and a meal along. She kept money to give the preacher some every time he come, and she'd ask my mother if she had any. Well, if Mama didn't, she'd give her some to give. And when I went to Johnson City to work, I sent Mama money every month to give to the preacher.
So you all took care of the preacher?
Yeah.
Sometimes
members.
they'd give the preacher a pounding. You know what a pounding meant?
Yeah. But
Anything that they had canned stuff or whatever they had to eat or whatever.
I could water them.
Well, the members of the church would bring it in and give it to the preacher, to the pastor of the church. They called it a pounding.
Pounding.
Yeah.
A pound of this or a pound of that, or a bag of this or a bag of that.
Bag of potatoes or any kind of canned stuff they had. Didn't make any difference what it was. I remember one time they gave a preacher there where I went to church, gave him a pounding. Well, it was one lady she got. She is, as they used to say, she is a ramrod in the thing, you know. She's in charge of it. So, found out later what she put into the pounding. She put in some beans. Some beans that they had grown and they'd hulled out, you know. She'd put a lot of sulfur in them. When they went to cook the beans, boy, I'll tell you, the lady, she was a cousin of mine. She says when we went to cook them beans, said I had to open the doors and open all the windows. Said I never smelled such a scent. Says we couldn't eat a bite of the beans she'd brought to the pound.
Why would they have put sulfur in beans?
Put it in to keep the weevils out. Bugs out.
Yeah.
Did a lot of your kinfolk move away and then come back to Greenbrier?
Well, no, they didn't come back, did they? All many of them.
A lot of them didn't, no.
No.
But you did, I believe. Did you not?
Yeah, I moved away in 1930.
They still come back. Well, it's so long buying the land up. They be getting by. You know, when my first news come to me, I worked Johnson City, and us girls was all through. Captain Zisha come out of his office. Oh, I said, Birgie said, now people won't have to come up here and get jobs. They just come in the park.
What did people think about that?
Oh, I wish it never had to come. I'd give anything to spend all my days in Greenbrier.
Well, a lot of people, when they moved out,
I tried. I ain't never got over it. Of course, I lived pretty close, but they nowhere like Greenbrier.
What?
Nowhere like Greenbrier. Oliver might think the cold is. He come up in Greenbrier a lot. That's where he come to hunt his wife.
Yeah, there's more pretty girls up there than there was down in Emerald's Cove where I live.
You're pretty much an authority on pretty girls, aren't you?
Yeah.
His wife and me second cousins. We run together all the time.
Greenbrier was bigger and probably even more productive than even the Sugar Lands, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really a lively place up there. They'd have singings at night and for the young folks to come to. And a whole lot of other places they didn't have that. And they had a lot more youngsters up there than they did a lot of other places.
We had real good turnouts, didn't we, Walter?
Yeah.
Was there younger married people up in that section? Was there a lot of new babies being born? Was it a new development sort of in the mountain community?
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sure was.
Yeah.
Was old people still up there too, though?
Oh yeah, we stayed there till they passed away. Most of them. Some of them moved out now. Had to move out in their old days. And they never was satisfied.
Well, a lot of people, when they sold out and moved away, they'd buy a farm someplace and they'd go and do it. Now, when me and my dad, our families moved away, bought a place, 104 acres in Jefferson County, for $5,000, paid $2,500 down on it. And that is 1930. Well, you know, that is right in the Depression. It is the beginning of it, you know. So the price the bottom just fell out under everything. We was getting to grow tobacco and things like that to sell to finish paying it. But shoot, you couldn't get anything for anything you had to sell. And so I stayed out there 5 years, or 4 years. I moved back in 34 when I went to CC's. But I'll tell you, as they used to say, times was only tolerable then.
Mm-hmm.
Did you all lose the farm in Jeff City?
Well, my older brother, he'd been in the service, got wounded, and he's a drawing a pension. So he finally took it over and got a government loan on it, and he finally got it all paid off. But the $2,500 my dad paid on it, why, it is just gone. Of course, it went into my brother's.
Was there a debating society up there?
Yeah, they had one time up there, I know they had a place down there, meet at the old schoolhouse in Emery School and debate on certain subjects, you know.
You mean just as part of school, or was this a part of the community?
Yeah, just the whole community, surrounding communities. They'd pick two people to debate against two others. So it really has some terrible times. I remember one time having a debate down there. Me and a Morgan boy, we used to debate together on the scenes of nature and the arts of man. We had the scenes of nature, and the others had the arts of man.
Scenes of nature?
Yeah.
Which is more what, I believe you said a while ago, which is more pleasant to the eye?
Yeah, which is more pleasant to the human eye. Now, it's the way it was. And so we had a terrible debate. This Morgan boy, he didn't know much about debate. One of them got up and he's talking about moonshine whiskey, about how it showed how people went for it, you know. Well, it wasn't anything to the human eye. Something like that's just a look upon, you know, was pleasing to the eye. It was the taste that they went for more than the. Well, it come my time to get up. So I told him, I said, now which would be more attractive to the human eye? I said, if two people would go down, they talked about, one of them had talked about the paint and the makeup that the young ladies would put on, you know, to make them handsome, attractive to the human eye. So I got up and I said, now if two young ladies had walked down the road out there, I said, one of them with her paint and her powders on, just all dolled up to the top, and I said one of them would walk down there just a little ways from her without anything on, just like nature had given her. I said, which one of them would be more attractive to the human eye? And boy, you talk about the houses floor. Why, they said the one that didn't have the clothes on would be. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we won the debate, and that was that. He thought that he had a great point that was really worth something about the moonshine whiskey. Mm-hmm. And so he said after that, he got up and I just had one point. He said he got up there and just tore it all to pieces.
That's better off than that was no moonshine. And it's talking about old people that leave it. I had a great uncle who moved down in Blount County. You know, he lived with his son a while. And he started walking back to Greenbrier. Uncle William Whaley. James West, his son, went and overtook him. He said, Pap, where are you going? He said, well, I'm going back to Greenbrier, my home. He said, why, you can't. Boy, he says, I will, too. And he'd stand to beg him. Well, Granny Surrey does the same thing. Uncle Tom and them just had to watch her. She started back, and they missed her. And she's getting way up in years. And they had to watch her like a little kid. They had to leave so bad.
They just were, wherever they were, had turned around and were heading back home?
Yes. Well, they moved to Cleveland, Tennessee. Uncle Tom did. Miss Bama, she's way away from Greenbrier. If Uncle William been young, he could have walked it back, but he's old. Just like a child. He just thought he could go back.
Did you ever try to go back?
No, I stayed up there. There weren't many people living up there, and I lived up there, was y'all?
No, there wasn't.
We lived right below CC camp.
What was it like to be up there and to see all those people trickling out?
Well, it hurt you. Yeah, that was heartbreaking. Seeing all the
Yeah,
people.
you'd see them going out with a wagon, and they'd have a cow tied to the back end of the wagon, following along, and a dog or two were following them. Some of them where they didn't move off too far.
Dad didn't move out till he moved out of the hotel, and then it was tore down. Auburn took over to Smoky School
Yeah.
and built a gymnasium out of it. Auburn, that's where he went. A lot of people don't know that. George Franklin had tear it down. But then Johnny lived right below CC camp. And all.
Where was the CCC camp in that section?
It's on the right-hand prom, wasn't it all? Robert
Yeah,
worked
it
there.
is about-
My husband did too.
About a quarter of a mile from the fork of the river up the right-hand prong.
How would you give credit to the CCCs as giving you a boost in life? Did it help you? I believe you said some of the people stayed at the hotel.
They did. A lot of them stayed with Dad. The Foreman's, some of them, Sam Taylor, Jesse Buchanan. There's some more.
J.M. Scott.
Yeah. And that Rollins band stayed a long time till he moved to Down West.
Yeah, Ed Rollins.
And some more of them. That's where Sister already met her husband. He's someone in the CCs.
But it gave you a salary by the
Yeah.
month when you were working for
Oh,
them?
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, a leader, he got
Yeah.
$45, and the assistant leader got 36. And just a common labor, why he got $30.
Did you have to work hard?
No, you didn't have to work hard.
Who'd you work under, Mr.
I
Scott?
worked under Mr. Scott,
He was a
T.J.
good
and
old
Scott.
man.
How many hours a day?
Worked 8 hours. 8 hours a day.
Was that a break from the work you've been doing?
Yeah, it wasn't as hard as working out on the farm, like kind of farm work that people done back
But there's
then.
boys from there from everywhere, nearly Johnson City, places, and all.
Was there any Yankees up there
No,
working the CCC camp, I mean?
I don't think so, was there?
No, I don't think so. There's a quite a number from North Carolina, and a whole lot is from,
Some from Johnson City,
yeah, Greenville, and just all
surrounding
over.
cities. Sevierville.
One of the things that you said that you did working upon toward Trillium Gap in 1936, I believe you said.
The Declaration. And all.
How many cemeteries are up there?
Well,
4?
oh no, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9
Gosh.
that I know of, maybe more than that.
This
lot of-
year, I see one on all.
You've got the first one on Engine Creek, and then you've got F.E. Huskey, and then you've got Lige Whaley, and then you've got the one on Laurel, and you've got the Ornby, and then the one at Friendship, and one at there at Clemens, and you've got Partontown, and you've got the Barnes. That's 9 that I can name real quickly.
Do you ever think that without the park, that land may not have been saved? Is there anything good out of the park taking over Greenbrier?
No. I don't see nothing good. It's broke a lot of people. Well, they never was satisfied no more. I told a person I thought, I didn't believe the good Lord was like that. You know, that bridge washed away over. I said, well, don't tell, I mean, Glenn. I said, don't tell him what happened. I said, I don't believe the good Lord is pleased to run his people out of there.
But you are glad that you can go back anytime you want to with anybody that wants to take you back, aren't you?
Yes, but I'm getting some, I can't walk up to that. I call it the Whaley graveyard. It's a Whaley woman. She is a Whaley, and let's see, who was she married? Pate. She's a Whaley and married to Pate. Was the first one's ever buried there in that graveyard, Oliver. And when Uncle Dave Clemens bought that land, he told them to fence it in, but to leave room for my great granny here by her husband. And they did. But there's few buried on the hill, and Papa and a lot of the other men gathered down towards the river and made up and bought more from Allen Days on the hill. And Sister Alberti and Zenith and Alberti's husband year before last cleaned that graveyard off all over.
When you talk about Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt, Uncle John and Aunt Fred and Aunt Sally and Sister Susie, these people aren't all your brothers and sisters and grandpas and uncles, are they? What is that? What do these terms mean? If you know what I'm trying.
I just mostly mentioned my great grandparents, and then my real uncles and real aunts.
Uncle John, Uncle.
Yeah, I had Uncle John. Papa had a brother named John.
All right.
Lived on Laurel.
A lot of times those terms are terms of respect to older people too.
Oh
aren't they?
yeah, Mama taught us that. That's Uncle Elijah and Aunt Surrey. Well, there was Johnny, my husband, but they wasn't mine.
But you grew up calling people aunts and
Mama
uncles
taught us that.
because of their age.
When I got old, after I'd go sit with her days and days. She was like, here, a little, I live in 100 years, just like 1 year. I loved old people. I like to be around them.
What did she tell you? What are some of the things she taught you?
But she taught me a lot of things. She talked about the Ku Klux Klan, and then she said that, you know, some of them said there'd never been no painters in Greenboro. But Granny told me that there was painters up there. She said they was cooking some fresh meat, you know, on those kettles that hang over the fire. And said this one come got on their house. She thought they was going to tear the boards all up. And she said they sat up nearly all night till he left. And Papa said that there was painters up there. See, he had to survey all that land up there. Shepherd sold it, you know, to that other company. And then Uncle George Whaley looked over the land, and they had 3 camps up there. You go camping 2 or 3 miles out of the settlement. Was you ever up there, or was there one of them camps?
Yeah, I was up there one time.
I went when I was about 10-year-old, camped out with Papa and Uncle Calvin, and Uncle Doc. And Uncle Calvin said, you're not sleeping down. And then me and Papa and my brother and Louis Ramsey and 3 of his boys and his daughter, they only, you know, all. She said, Birgie, let's go with them camping to Hillfield. Now there's a man went up there. It's, I guess it's 3 miles out of the settlement, wasn't it, Oliver? Would you ever?
Yeah.
And cleared a field and built a house and lived up there till he got sick. And they always called it the Hillfield. And Papa tended corn once with that bird. And well, Jim came, and Uncle Joe Sneed did too.
Did she ever talk about her people in the Civil War?
Granny, she didn't talk too much to me about things like that.
What else did she tell you?
Huh?
What else did she teach you?
I told you a while ago, you know, a lot about her moving and all, and then coming back in the glades and settling and meeting him, and then going to Greenbrier and stayed there till she died. You know.
She was an old woman when you was a child then.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
she was one of the,
We lived right by them, and I go, well, I stayed with her more than all the rest of her great-grandchildren, but
she used a pipe, as I recall, didn't she?
yeah.
Had a big bass voice for a little lady.
She's good. I enjoyed staying with her. I liked to hear her talk that old time talk.
What was old time talk?
Well, she'd tell things that happened back when she was a child, you know, about the Ku Klux Klans and things like that, and things.
Way back time.
Yeah, way back when she was in the Glades, lived in the Glades before she come to Greenbrier. You know, I enjoyed staying with her. But they lived with my grandpa if they got old. They wouldn't stay no more with none of the rest of the children. She's a sharp old woman. Last time she went to church, they carried her in just a straight chair, Glenn. She told them she wanted to go, and Grandpa lived down then on Granny Jane's place. Just a little piece, and they took her. I never will forget that. And the last time that she's carried in the chairs, we lived home. She said, now, I want to go down to Cardy's nap. She said, Cardy, Mama's expecting. She said, Cardy or the baby one's going to pass away. And they carried her in the chair, and she stayed all day. Then they took her back. Well, the baby just lived 4 days, nights, and it died. She just, it's interesting to hear her talk.
How did she?
Oh, that's when you lived in Greenbrier. Yeah.
Oliver, what was a fitified spring?
Just thinking
Well,
about the spasmodic.
That's what they called it back then. They called it the spasmodic spring.
Uh-huh.
Well, it'd take it about 15 minutes to make a complete change. It'd just come, well, you could hear it back at the back of it, back in the ground, the rock where it's coming out. You could hear it roaring back in there before it'd get out. Well, about 7 or 8 minutes, it'd just run just a big stream. All at once, then it'd just stop. It'd take it about 15 minutes, or about 15 minutes to make a complete change from one to the other.
Where was this located?
It is located up on the right-hand prong. Up from it's
On the boat. That's where
what
we
they call
live.
the runaround up at the upper end now. The road.
Up at Greenbrier.
Yeah.
Mac Whaley lived there,
Yeah.
didn't he, Oliver?
Yeah.
Hurley, his wife. Well, John, they sent Johnny up there. You know, he's a foreman and a bunch of boys, Oliver.
Yeah.
Cut timber in there, and they left one of the boys to cook, you know. He went out there to get some water, and he come back, he talked ugly. I'm not going to tell what he said. And it tickled Johnny. He said, oh, he'll come back in a little bit. Oh, he said it won't. And he said, well, come on, boys. And they went out there. I guess they'd have come out of there if Johnny hadn't been. Then they just come go.
Well, we first have mention of that as a result of an earthquake in 1916, but you was telling me a little deal about working with CCCs, about maybe why it changed.
Yeah. That was, it's doing had a rock bar up there, way back on the mountain there. They went through and had of course, had to do it by hand. Drill a hole, one would take a piece of steel, and they called it shaking steel. Every time the 2 men would do the hammering, you know, they had sledgehammers that they'd drive the steel with, and every time one of them would hit it, why, he'd turn you around, you know, so it'd get a round hole. And they said that's what caused it to quit acting.
But you dropped dynamite in that hole, though.
Yeah, but it dropped dynamite in there then and blasted the rock up till they could get a roadway, a trailway on to the rock bar. And they said that's what caused it. Now, Birgie's son-in-law, one that married her daughter later, he's the one that's doing the shooting.
Jesse Buchanan.
Yeah.
What years was that, Oliver, that the dynamite was?
Well, I guess that is along about 35.
That's the CC's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, I went in.
Yeah, he stayed at the
I went
hotel.
in
That's where he met his
34 and come
sister.
out 36.
And they moved to North Carolina. Oh.
One other incident, Oliver, relate how you worked the roads or the procedures that society had in working the roads.
Well, back then, they had in a certain district, they had what they called old road overseer. It was one that's appointed from the higher up, you know. And so he'd go around and he'd summons everybody over. Then I believe it was 21 years
Yeah, it's
old. You
21.
had to work the road. He'd go around and he'd summon them all to be at a certain place where they'd start to work at a certain day. And you had to be there or you had to hire someone to work in your place. And you could have your choice. You could work 6 days a year or pay $9, $1.50 a day.
To the county treasurer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's the way they used to keep the roads up, wasn't it, all?
Yeah, well, this road overseer, I don't think he had to work himself. He just had to see that the others would do the work.
Were you a worker or a payer?
I was a worker. I didn't have to work much. They quit that pretty soon after I got old enough to
It
work.
went out of business in the early 30s with the CCCs and the WPAs and the ER, all those other
Yeah,
alphabetic.
when I come out the CCs in 36, I went to work on the WPA then. Well, it got about as much again working on the WPA as you did in working in the CCs. Got $2 and something a day working on the WPA, where you just got $1, just a common labor in the CC.
Back to working on, if an elderly gentleman in the community was too old to work, he could hire you to work in his place
Yeah.
rather than pay the $9. He could hire you $1 a day.
Someone that wasn't old enough to have to work, why he could work. They could get him some of them, but just teenagers would work.
Did you do that a lot?
Not too much, no. Worked some on when I moved out to Jefferson County, why they had the same rule out there. I remember working 1 year out there on the road.
Did you folks that lived in the lower part of, which is now Greenbrier Cove, but Embers Cove in that day, did you compete to see who could keep the best road up, the Greenbrier people or the Embers Cove people? Did you have a contest going on?
No, I never did know
No.
of any going on.
Well, you know that road down to your mother's and my house. Now, Johnny was foreman, and the CC's fixed that road there first, didn't you?
Yeah.
And Jesse Buchanan, he up there at the back of Hazel's, where they got the gravelly. First and taught it till the Connie had it taught. And all. That's that comes. But I wouldn't have lived in the Cove at all.
Mention the names, but people in Greenbrier, they were above the law, or they found a hole to crawl through. But anyway, you tell that story about a certain, well, as I was telling you, most all people
About a
get.
certain lady.
Yeah, well, like Aunt Nan Shule, storekeeper, she says if you're going to do, you say this, and then lead off to that other lady. If you're going to do business, do it in a businesslike manner. About going to get her whiskey.
Yeah, well, I could tell the one that there was a.
Quote Aunt Nan Shule's comment first.
Well, Now that was an experience I experienced my own self. Well, I'd borrowed some money. I borrowed some money and I got out and I bought up a bunch of calves in the spring. I'd keep them till late fall and I'd sell them. I could just about double on them. So the man that I borrowed the money from, well, he got to needing his money, and so he come and told me he's a needing it. Well, I went to Miss Shoes, Nan Shoes. She said, yeah. He says, I'll let you have the money. But she says, I do business in a business-like way. When I loan somebody some money, she says, always just draw up a little note, sign it, have them to sign it. And she says, I believe in when you do business, you ought to do it in a business-like way. Well, she had a good point there. So she let me have the money, and I went then and I paid this other fellow off that I'd borrowed from. Borrow from one, pay another, you know. But this other instance that Glenn mentioned is about, it was, well, I wouldn't say she was an old lady, but there's a couple of brothers that they had a moonshine still back on the hill. And she'd found out, this lady had found out where it was whenever they'd first built a fire, you know, to boil it off and to have a smoke. And she saw the smoke one day and she went up there and she found where there was a making. So the next time they went to make, she was watching for the smoke and she saw it, and so she got her a quart fruit jar and she hid up the mountain to where there was a making. She'd give them time to get some made off, you know, before she went. Well, when she got up there, they started to run, and she told them, says, don't be afraid, says, this is not the law. This is just one of your neighbors. And so they wanted to be polite. They asked her, says, lady, says, there's something that we can do for you? She says, yes, there most certainly is. Says, I want you to fill up my jar. So they filled her jar up, and she thanked them for filling it up, and she started to leave then, and she walked off a little ways, and she turned and looked back, and she says, now, boys, she says, say nothing, and there'll be nothing said. So there wasn't anything really that they could say. So she found out how to get moonshine without having to buy it or having to make it, either one.
For medicinal purposes, of course.
Well, they used to take whiskey and make camphor out of it, you know, over too.
Like you said, you went to man.
Just bought the camphor.
Money. And my grandfather did something.
Okay, we better move on. Now, keep access to these pictures without having to move lights, guys. Take a couple of these. This right here is good.
Trading, the main thing is trading of furs and herbs. What if you can remember the process? If you remember any of the things like yellow root and anything else that you took down to Arthur Cantrell's and sold, and if you remember how much you got for it, it's okay, it's not like furs particularly.
Who was it? How did you come to do, what kind of business did you do with Arthur Cantrell?
Well, he was the one that, where we went to buy our groceries now. He had a store down about half a mile below where we lived. And we went there, and he was the only merchant or the only storekeeper that was closed. And so that's where we done most of our trading, to buy groceries. And well, he just kept a line of any kind of clothing, most shoes or overalls or whatever you wanted to buy, mostly. He had it.
Did he trade in furs?
He did some, yeah. He
And
did.
that's how you come to do some business with him there.
Yeah, I'd take possum hides, different kind of hides down there. But most of the furs that is sold back then, that would be a fur buyer that would come through the community. And back then they'd come on, a whole other time they'd come on foot. They had a bag or container that they'd put the hides in. And one I remember very distinctly was John Sims would come, and boy, he'd Jew you down. I'm telling you the truth. You just have to set a price and just stick to it, or he'd get you down low. So the main things that you would trap or hunt for, if you had a dog that would treat possums, while you used your dog, and set steel traps too to catch them. And mink was another thing. Mink, good mink hide, a male hide would bring about $10 was about as much you could ever get back then.
What time are we talking about?
Well, the first season would open the first season would open then. When you was allowed to catch fur, would open about the 15th of October and close about the 15th of February.
These prices are from what year?
30s or 20s.
Yeah, back in the 20s, and also in the 30s. Yeah.
It's mink,
Yeah,
possum.
mink, possum, and I never did sell, but one skunk was all that I ever skinned. And boy, I'll tell you, I never did want to skin another one, because boy, such a sin. But you couldn't get much for a skunk hide. And I remember one time we got up at midnight, went a possum hunt, and you'd go. Reason why you get up at the midnight hour and go hunting, you'd catch bigger possums a whole lot. Them old big lizards, they wouldn't come out, a lot of them, in the fore part of the night, but in the after part of the night they would. And so I got up at midnight one night and caught two, and one of them, I shipped them to Abraham Fur Company. And one of them went in as a number one extra large. I got $1.60 for it. The other one went in as a large, got $1.20. That was $2.80. That was pretty good then, when you was working for what little work you could get to do was only $1 a day, you know. That was 2 days and a half pay that you'd have got for 2 days and a half work for a half a night's hunt.
And it's fun anyway.
Oh yeah.
Would you skin a bear?
I helped skin a bear one time. I killed one time and brought it in and skinned it, and well, got logged for that too.
What'd you get for a bear? Do you remember?
No, I never did sell any hide, because they come and got the hide. The first season wasn't open and wasn't allowed to kill no hides on the outside of the park, and so it didn't had the hide stretched up in the big old spring house there. And he said the game warden come, and he said the season wasn't open on raw fur, and he'd have to take the hide. So I don't know what he did with it, but he took it anyhow.
Did a lot of people get a lot of extra money hunting and trapping?
Yeah, they did. Well, you do pretty well back then if you could trap, and you couldn't catch too much because there wasn't too much to catch, and there's too many hunting, you know. So if you get $30, $40 in a winter, why, you thought you was doing pretty good business.
Muskrats.
Muskrats, they bring anything?
Yeah, they'd bring a dollar and about $1.50 a hide now. It's about what you get for for a muskrat that was a small size. You get a little more for one, maybe a couple of dollars for a large hide, and $1.50 for a small hide.
Beaver and otter were gone then, weren't they?
No, you didn't never hear any tell of a beaver or otter.
Did you hear stories of panthers?
Yeah, I did. One little story I'd like to tell you about my grandfather. He was a great hunter. He was an Owen, in Claw here. He's Owen, but too, he might have been, I guess, a little relation to Claw. But he is a hunter, and he's back in the mountains hunting up here one time. And back then they hunted with, they called them the old hog rifle, or a pig eye. Some people call them a pig eye rifle. And he's going up the way up, I believe he said it's on the left-hand prong, way high out. And he said across, going up a trail, you know, they used to run cattle up there, and they had trails that they'd go up there to see about the cattle. So he's going up there, walking up a trail, and he looked across the stream over on the other side where a big tree had fell down, up and down, and boy, there lay he said it was a big panther laying there asleep on that log. Of course, he could have made noise over on the other side, and it wouldn't have hurt him because of the ripples of the water, you know, the falls there. And he said that he decided he'd shoot it. And he said that he cocked his gun, got it up, just ready to pull the trigger, and he said the bushes, Laura at the back of it said something shook them bushes. And he said he just took his gun down to see what it was, and he said a big bear come a-walking out, and said when it saw the panther laying on this big log by the river, he said it just juked down just like a cat about to leap onto something or another, a rat or rabbit or something. He said it just eased up the side of that log and it got up even with the panther. Said he'd come back and said he just knocked that panther off into the river. And boy, said that panther come out of there and leaped back onto that log and onto the bear it went. And he said they had it around there for quite a little while. And he said, finally said the bear got a good hug on him, on the panther. He said after a while, he said the panther just went just limp, you know. And he said it turned it loose then, and said it just fell down. Said it was dead. There wasn't any question about it. Said the panther was dead. And he said the bear then, he turned around and went walking back in the lawn. And he said he went over there then to see what had really happened to the bear. And he said that just a little ways out in the lawn, he said there lay the bear. And he said that thing, he said, that panther, he said, had just cut it all to pieces. And he said as it had walked out through the laurel, the bushes, he said its entrails was dragging the ground and the brush undergrowth there. And he said there was both of them dead, the bear and the panther both dead. And he said he didn't say what he did with the panther, but he skinned the bear and he took the hide and 1/4 of it in with him. So that is about all of that bear tale. Panther.
Who told you that story?
That is my grandfather.
When did he say that happened?
That happened back when he was a young man, like.
1890s maybe?
Yeah, somewhere along there, yeah, I'd say along about 1890.
That's a good story. I think that's good.